She called me at work on a Tuesday. I remember that specifically, Tuesday, because I'd just come back from a site inspection and my boots were still wet from the slush outside the Brampton warehouse. 34 years I'd worked in logistics. I knew every Tuesday like I knew the back of my hand. She didn't say hello. She said, "Dad's gone, and you need to know, everything's changing now." My wife's father had been ill for about 8 months. Prostate cancer that moved faster than anyone expected. I liked the man. Quiet, measured. The kind of person who fixed things instead of talking about them. We'd had our differences over the years, mostly about money, mostly about how he felt I hadn't provided enough for his daughter. But I respected him. When he got sick, I drove my wife to Sudbury every weekend without being asked. She didn't thank me for that. Not once. Her father had built something real over his lifetime. He'd owned a chain of building supply stores across northern Ontario, started from a single location in the late 70s. When the bigger chains moved in, he didn't fight them. He sold the Timmins and Kapuskasing locations at exactly the right moment and held on to the Sudbury flagship. He knew what he was doing. The man was careful with everything, including who he trusted. I didn't know the numbers. That's not something he and I discussed. I knew it was substantial. I didn't know how substantial. My wife found out the week after the funeral. She came back from the lawyer's office in Sudbury. She'd driven up alone, which I noticed but didn't mention, and she was different when she walked through our front door. There's no other way to describe it. She stood in the hallway of the house we'd lived in together for 26 years, and she looked at me the way you look at furniture you're thinking of replacing. "We need to talk," she said. We sat at the kitchen table. She had a folder in front of her. She didn't open it. She told me the total figure. I won't repeat it here, but it was enough to change the math on everything. His liquid assets alone, plus the real estate holdings, plus the sale value of the remaining store. She was looking at something in the range of what most people in this country will never see in 3 lifetimes. I sat with that for a moment. Then she said, "I've been thinking about what I want my life to look like." I said, "Okay," she said, "I don't think you're part of it. I'm 63 years old. I've been through things. I lost my brother to a heart attack when he was 51. I was laid off at 47 and rebuilt from nothing. I know what shock feels like. It sits behind your sternum, not in your throat. It doesn't make you cry right away. It makes you very, very still." I said, "I see." She said she wanted me to find somewhere else to stay. She said the house would be hers. She'd have her lawyer draw up the paperwork. She said she was prepared to give me a fair settlement and that I shouldn't make this difficult. I asked her where this was coming from. She said it's been coming for a long time. The money just made it possible. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't slam anything. I picked up my mug of tea, which had gone cold, and I looked out the kitchen window at the snow in the backyard, the old bird feeder I'd put up 8 years ago, the fence I'd replaced 2 summers ago, and I said, "I'll need a few days to make arrangements." She looked like she'd expected more of a fight. I didn't give her one. My son-in-law, my daughter's husband, let me stay in their spare room in Mississauga. My daughter cried when I showed up with 2 bags. She wanted to call her mother immediately. I asked her not to. I told her I needed to think clearly before anyone started making phone calls. The first thing I did the next morning was call a family lawyer. Not the one my wife and I had used years ago for our wills. A different one. Someone I found through a colleague at work who'd been through a divorce in his late 50s. Her name was Margaret, and she had an office on your Ontario street with a view of a parking garage and the kind of no-nonsense approach I needed at that moment. She asked me to tell her everything. I told her, start to finish, the call at work, the folder on the table, the words "I don't think you're part of it." She typed while I talked. When I finished, she looked at her screen for a moment and then said, "How long have you been married?" 26 years. And the house, is it in both names? We bought it together in 1999. Yes. And her father's estate? She's been appointed sole beneficiary? As far as I understood, yes. Margaret nodded slowly and said, "Okay, then here's what you need to understand." She explained that in Ontario, an inheritance is generally considered separate property. It doesn't automatically get split down the middle in a divorce the way shared assets do. Her father's estate in principle was hers, but 26 years of marriage wasn't nothing. The matrimonial home was different. The matrimonial home in Ontario has its own rules entirely, and those rules don't care whose name feels more important. She said, "You have equal right to possess that home." She cannot simply ask you to leave and expect you to have no claim. I said, "She already did ask me to leave. You left voluntarily. I left to keep the peace." Margaret looked at me. "Don't make any more voluntary moves without talking to me first." She also explained something I hadn't thought about, the concept of net family property, equalization payments, how the calculation works when one party comes into significant assets during the marriage. Her father's estate itself might be protected, but everything else, the appreciation of the matrimonial home, the value accumulated during our marriage, that was a different matter. She said, "This is not as simple as she seems to think it is." I thanked her and paid the consultation fee and drove back to my daughter's house through the gray February afternoon, and I sat in the spare room and I thought about 26 years. I thought about the early years in the apartment on Dufferin before we had anything. I thought about the pregnancy that didn't survive, our first, the one we never talk about, and the year that followed, the hardest year, and how we held each other through it. I thought about building the life in the house she now wanted me to leave quietly. I didn't feel anger. Not exactly. What I felt was something older and quieter than anger. I felt the precise weight of being erased. My wife had hired a lawyer by that point. Her own, someone recommended by the estate people in Sudbury. He sent a letter to Margaret's office within the week. It was professional and firm. It outlined a proposed settlement. A lump sum that was, in absolute terms, not small, but in relative terms, given what she'd inherited, was the kind of number that says we want this done fast and we're hoping you're too tired to push back. Margaret called me after she read it. She said, "They're not taking this seriously yet. That's actually useful." I asked what she meant. She said, "It means they've made assumptions about you. Let them keep making them for a while." I didn't contact my wife directly. She contacted me once, about 2 weeks in, to ask about a plumber's number she'd lost. I gave her the number. We didn't talk about anything else. The call lasted less than 90 seconds. My daughter found out more than I told her, eventually. She has her mother's instincts for reading a room. She called her mother herself, which I'd known was coming, and whatever was said between them didn't change my wife's position, but it also clearly cost her something. When my daughter called me afterward, she was quiet for a long time before she said, "I don't understand her right now, Dad." I said, "You don't have to." What I didn't say, what I've never said to my daughter, is that I understood her mother better than either of them realized. I knew what her father's disapproval had cost her over the years. I knew she'd spent decades feeling like she was managing two households, his expectations and ours. I knew the money felt like permission, like finally being handed the controls. I don't say any of this to excuse what she did. I say it because understanding someone isn't the same as accepting what they do to you. The appraisal on the matrimonial home came back at just over $800,000. It was a detached home in Brampton, nothing fancy, but the market had done what the market does over 25 years. We bought it for just under $250,000. That appreciation was joint. Margaret explained how that factored into the equalization calculation, and I listened very carefully. There was also the pension, my workplace pension, which I'd been contributing to for over 30 years. That was subject to division. But so was the portion of her own RRSP that had grown during the marriage. These things go both ways. That's what people forget when they think money coming in from outside changes everything. Some things don't move, and a family lawyer who's seen this before knows exactly which things those are. Margaret also raised something I hadn't brought up. She said, "You mentioned you drove her to Sudbury every weekend during her father's illness." I said yes. She said, "For how long?" 8 months, roughly. "And you continued working during that time?" "Full time?" "Yes." I'd taken a handful of days when things got critical, but mostly, yes. She made a note of that. I didn't ask why at the time. The mediation was scheduled for a Thursday morning in early April. We met at an office building in downtown Mississauga, neutral ground. I wore the gray sport coat my daughter had ironed the night before. I got there 12 minutes early. My wife arrived with her lawyer and didn't look at me when she came through the door. We sat on opposite sides of a long table. The mediator explained the process. Everybody nodded. Her lawyer presented their offer first. It was a revised version of the original letter, slightly more generous, but still built on the assumption that I would be grateful for it and not ask too many questions. Margaret presented our position. She was unhurried. She went through the matrimonial home equity, the pension calculations, the RRSP figures, the duration of the marriage, the specific contributions, including, yes, the 8 months of weekend drives to Sudbury. Her lawyer pushed back on several points. His voice had a quality I recognized, the measured confidence of someone who expects to win before the conversation starts. Margaret didn't raise her voice. She answered each point with a specific figure or a specific provision of the Family Law Act. She was precise in the way that very good lawyers are precise, not performing competence, just demonstrating it quietly. At one point her lawyer said something I won't repeat exactly, but the implication was that I had contributed less to the marriage than I was claiming. I looked at the table when he said it. Margaret said, "Would you like to review the documentation or shall we continue?" They continued. There was a break in the middle of the afternoon. I went down to the lobby and stood near the window and watched the traffic on Hurontario. And I thought about nothing in particular. My son-in-law had texted to ask how it was going. I typed back, "Still in it." When we reconvened, my wife spoke for the first time in hours. It was something small, a clarification about one of the property dates, but it was the first time I'd heard her voice since that 90-second phone call about the plumber. She looked tired. I didn't feel satisfaction about that. I want to be clear about that. She looked tired and I felt nothing in particular, which is its own kind of sadness. The mediation didn't resolve everything that day. It took 3 sessions over 2 months. But by the end of the second session, the shape of the agreement was becoming clear. The matrimonial home would be sold and the proceeds split according to the equalization calculation, which was considerably more in my favor than their original offer had implied. My pension was divided as required, but so were the RRSPs. There was a spousal support component, not indefinite but structured given the length of the marriage and the disparity in our circumstances going forward. Her father's estate remained hers. That was never in question. But the rest, the things we had built together, the ordinary accumulation of 26 years, that was accounted for. Properly. The house sold in June. We accepted an offer on a Wednesday and both signed the same day through our lawyers without being in the same room. I found a condo in Oakville, 2 bedrooms which I didn't need but wanted. My daughter had mentioned staying sometimes and my son-in-law had made noises about the grandchildren I don't have yet, but apparently everyone's planning for. It was on a high floor with a view toward the lake. On clear days, I can see across the water. I stood in the empty unit the day I got the keys, and I didn't feel what I expected to feel. I expected grief, I think. Or maybe relief. Something clean and recognizable. What I felt was quieter than either of those. It was the feeling of a door that has been properly closed, not slammed, not left ajar, just closed, with both hands, deliberately. My daughter came to help me move in on the Saturday. Her husband built the bookshelves. I made coffee and got in the way more than I helped, which is apparently a family tradition at this point. We ordered pizza at 7 and sat on the floor because the couch hadn't arrived yet, and my daughter told a story about her mother that made both of us laugh before either of us could think better of it. I have not spoken to my wife since the agreement was finalized. I don't know what her life looks like now. I assume it looks like what she wanted, unencumbered, wide open, funded by her father's lifetime of careful work. I hope she finds what she was looking for. I mean that with all the ambiguity it contains. What I know is what my life looks like. I wake up early, which I've always done. I make proper coffee, not the pod machine stuff. My daughter bought me a pour-over kit as a housewarming gift, and I've used it every morning since. I take a walk along the waterfront path before the commuters take it over. I'm still working part-time now, consulting for a logistics firm that keeps asking me to go full-time, and I keep politely declining. I have a book going. Usually 2. There is a thing that happens when you survive the thing you were afraid of. When you get to the other side of it and stand there in your kitchen in Oakville on a February morning, older than you expected to be when this kind of thing happened to you, and you realize the noise has stopped. Not life. Life hasn't stopped. But the noise underneath it. The static that builds up over years of feeling unseen, of driving 8 months of weekends without thanks, of standing in your own hallway being looked at like furniture. That noise has stopped. I noticed it on a Thursday, maybe 6 weeks after I moved in. I was reading by the window, late afternoon light coming in low, the way it does in winter over the water, and I became aware of the silence around me, not as an absence, but as a presence. Something that had been given back. I thought about her father then, oddly, about the way he'd built his business, not by fighting everyone, but by knowing exactly when to hold and when to sell, by reading a situation clearly and not letting pride tell him a different story. I think at the end he was trying to tell his daughter something about what lasts and what doesn't. I don't think she heard it yet, but I did. I keep coming back to the bird feeder, the one I put up 8 years ago in the backyard of that house in Brampton. I built the post myself, set it in concrete, painted it twice because the first color looked wrong against the fence. Nobody asked me to do it. I just did it because I thought it would be nice, because that's what you do when a place is yours. You tend it. She didn't think about the bird feeder when she decided I should leave quietly. I don't think she thought about a lot of things, and that's what I've been sitting with. Not the anger, that passed faster than I expected, but the particular sadness of watching someone make a decision they can't uncross because they confused having money with having thought things through. My father used to say that how a person behaves when they suddenly have power over someone else tells you everything you couldn't see before. I didn't fully understand that when he said it. I understand it now, in a way I wish I didn't. What I know after all of it, the mediations, the lawyers, the months in my daughter's spare room, the new condo with the view of the lake, is that the outcomes in my life were never random. They followed from choices, mine and hers both. I drove to Sudbury every weekend for 8 months because it was the right thing to do. I didn't ask for recognition. I didn't keep score. I just did it because that's what decent people do when someone is suffering. Even when the relationship is complicated. Even when the man you're driving to see never entirely approved of you. That choice, to show up anyway without resentment, turned out to matter in ways I couldn't have predicted. Margaret noted it. The mediation noted it. 26 years of showing up noted. There's something in that worth sitting with. The things I'm most glad I carried through this, and I mean carried, because some of it was genuinely heavy, were not complicated things. It was the decision to stay honest when dishonesty would have been easier. To keep my word when I said I wouldn't escalate. To not say cruel things to my daughter about her mother even when I had every factual reason to. Those choices protected something in me that money and lawyers couldn't touch. Call it integrity. Call it character. It's the thing that lets you look at yourself in the mirror at 63 and not flinch. The second thing was knowing when to stop reacting and start thinking. My first instinct when she told me to leave was to argue. I didn't. I got quiet. I got counsel. I got clear. That restraint, not weakness, restraint is what gave Margaret something to work with. It's what kept my daughter's respect. It's what let me walk into that mediation room in a gray sport coat and sit down calmly across from people who'd assumed I'd be too tired to push back. And the third thing is the one nobody talks about enough. Just continuing. Just getting through the February mornings when the spare room felt very small and the future felt very uncertain and the version of yourself you planned on being was no longer available. You make coffee. You call your lawyer. You take the next step. Not because you feel ready, but because readiness is a thing you build by moving, not by waiting. I'm not the same person I was when she called me at work that Tuesday. I'm not sure I'd want to be.